Hallo, herzlich willkommen. Danke dir für die Introduction. Danke an Ibanez, dass ich hier sein darf. Does everybody speak German? Yes? You don't, right? Okay, so we have some people that don't speak German. I'm gonna try and speak my most proper English so everybody understands it. Hope that's cool. Once again, thank you for being here. What I just played was a song from my solo project called Levy, and it's called If Romantical Composers Had a Bass Guitar. So what I basically tried to do with that song was to combine like a classical piano piece with bass as sort of a solo instrument. And yeah, that's an approach that I chose to spark some creativity. I first wrote the piano part and everything else, and then kind of composed the bass part on top of that. So that kind of resembles how I got to music as well, because I started playing piano when I was like 3 years old. And I did that until I was 12 or 13 maybe. And then I started to play in bands, and I discovered metal and rock. And today I kind of want to take you on a little journey through my personal development and also our history as a band. As I said, with 12, I think I met Leon, our drummer, and we started out playing in a cover band together. And we also met the other guys at the same music conservatory in our hometown, Wiesbaden. And over the years, we played with so many people in different bands and different instruments. I was playing guitar most of the time, and I was also singing. And it wasn't until 2017 until we joined forces with Christoph and Manu. And yeah, that's when we did the Covenant record. That was the first record that I played bass on ever. And I want to start from there and play a song of that record. And I don't know if you guys mentioned it, like by the end of the clinic, we will do a Q&A, so you can ask me anything. But also, if you have any specific questions in between, you can always just raise your hand and I'll try to see you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that record was the first time where we kind of became part of the progressive metal scene. We had our first label deal back then with Long Branch Records, and they got us to play at the Tech Fest in Guildford. I think it's not existing anymore, but back then, in 2018, that was like the go-to prog gent festival in Europe, which is now Radar and Euroblast probably. But yeah, that was really exciting for us. We played our first very small UK tour with a band called Ibanez Bässe, who also aren't a thing anymore, but they were great back then, and we played in front of maybe like 10 people or something every night, in pubs and all that stuff, leading up to that festival. And yeah, we returned back home from that, and we wanted to make another record that is even proggier. So we did Artificial Void, and bass playing wise, you already heard on Malleable just now that I did some slapping, but for the most part I was playing with a pick, and I didn't do much hybrid picking on Covenant because I didn't know it existed basically. And then on the Artificial Void record, I really did the hybrid picking a lot, so I could play with pick, but also have like the pop attacks that you know from slapping. Back then, we really didn't know much about touring and how to do it and stuff like that. But we were super lucky because our friends in Polyphia discovered us, and they were kind enough to take us on their Europe tour back then. And I'm trying to think of what venue we played in Cologne, because we definitely played in Cologne back then. But even Polyphia was like playing in front of like 400 people average during that time. So yeah, it was maybe for them a small tour, but for us it was definitely a big deal, supporting one of our favorite bands for the first time. And yeah, that was right before COVID, so the tour was in 2020, beginning of 2020, and we were actually supposed to go to China in March 2020, which then didn't happen, and we just did China now 5 years later. So yeah, it was everything a little bit difficult because we were just starting to tour, and we had like a tour lined up with Periphery as well and a lot of cool stuff. But yeah, we had to cancel everything and instead stayed home. And because we didn't have like the live feedback from people, and I was getting more into like beat production during that time. And then we did a collab track with Polyphia, and that kind of kicked off a new era for us, a little bit more away from the prog metal side. And yeah, that's where we did the song Real. And if you know the song, you know that it has both Tim and Clay on it from Polyphia, so bassist Clay. And I'm gonna play the song as I initially wrote the bass part. I never learned the way he plays it, and I think it's good like that. It's the same thing with me not having a driver's license. Same stuff. All right, this is Real. Thank you so much. Yeah. So as you could hear, there was quite a shift in our aesthetic back then. So with Covenant and Artificial Void, we were really like, doing the best we could to cater the prog scene, and I think we did great on it. But it just felt cool to do a little bit different projects, especially during lockdown. And we were getting into a lot of pop music, and I was also studying pop bass, if you want to put it like that. So I studied at the Pop Academy in Mannheim, and Manu as well. And we shared a flat during the making of these songs. So yeah, maybe you could notice that sometimes I was just basically holding down like full notes, just like that, and making more legato kind of song comping kind of stuff. And at the same time, I was really expanding at the implementing of my left hand. So a lot of people do double thumping, but for some reason, it always felt very unnatural to me. So I tried to find a workaround, and I did a lot of like left hand muting and practiced combinations like just slap, left, pop. And you can do the same thing, for example, with group of 5 or a group of 7. And you can just expand that and fill out the subdivisions. And that's stuff that I then did in songs like Real. And yeah, it's cool because Manuel, our main guitar player, has this crazy right-hand technique. So I always have to find ways to fill the same subdivisions to make it work. And that's one of the ways. So I can recommend to try that for sure. So we went a little bit further with the pop stuff and did the record called Gold. That record was a special one because it has a lot of songs. I think it has 16 songs on it. And they are all a little bit different and it feels a little bit patchy. And that was because we went through a little bit of a weird phase with a label back in the day, and it was the first time where we were signed to a major label, and a lot of stuff just was combined that prolonged that album making. So we took like 2 or 2.5 years to make the record, and usually we release an album every year. So that felt weird to us, and in the end we had so many songs, like there's definitely like 10 songs or something that didn't even make it on the record. But anyways, we tried a lot of stuff, and one of the coolest songs I think on the record is called Ocean. I want to play that because it's a little bit more straightforward than most of the album. It's pretty like leaning on the rock side of things, and has some cool shifts in harmony. Maybe the theory nerds in here will hear them. This is Ocean. I was so stoked when I first discovered that I can just end on the low B string. So yeah, it's always a lot of fun. Yeah, so that was the gold record, or I should say that was the rock or harder side of the record. And the record had a lot of pop songs, if you want to put it that way. And most important one, and my favorite one, I'm gonna play for you now. I'm sure some of you will recognize it. Yeah, so that was pop era Unprocessed, and yeah, I mean, we're not only here to talk about the songs or myself, it's also a little bit about these amazing basses that I'm playing here, which is the SR Prestige series, the new one. And I think now's a good point to talk about it, because you could just hear that this bass is like pretty versatile. You can play pretty much any genre with it, and that's what I love about it. There's a lot of instruments out there that are specifically built for the progressive metal genre, all the multi-scale, fan fret, headless, you name it stuff. And that's all pretty great. And I've spent the last couple of years playing the multi-scale SR bass, the one with the Fishman pickups, and that's also pretty awesome. And now returning from tour and playing these basses, I really do enjoy going back to the traditional frets, just because you don't really have as much of a difference of the fret size up here versus down here, which sometimes can be a little bit confusing, and sometimes the fan frets can get on your wrist a little bit. So that's not the case with this one. The playability is great, and as I said, the most important factor for me is that I can get all sorts of tones out of the instruments, even without doing a lot of like EQing here. I basically have everything on the max, and then I kind of mix with my hands. So if you play down here, you'll get a lot of sustain. If you play here, you get a little bit more attack. And if you switch between slapping, fingerstyle, tapping, and playing with a pick, you can determine your own sound just with your hands. And I always say, like, if you have an instrument in your hands and you just feel like playing it, like you want to play it, even without amplification, then that's a very good sign. That's definitely the case. After the masterclass, the instruments are still going to be here. I'll even let my setup here, so you can literally just plug in the bass and play with my sound and try it out yourself. So, after the gold record, we finally got back on stage. Our first gig after COVID was Rock am Ring. So that was super exciting. And after that, we played 2 USA tours with Polyphia again. And we were having so much fun, but somehow we felt like it's a little bit weird to try and make like a wall of death or something like that, and then have like a heavy main riff, and then some of the goat songs just kind of fall off into like a verse part or something, which is super cool on the record, but we wanted to make something that has a certain energy level and a certain aggression, so that translates to the live situation. And also, we were going separate ways with our label and a lot of the music business people that we worked with in the gold era, and we became an independent band, which we are until today. And yeah, all that summed up to our most heavy record to date, which is called And Everything in Between. And this record starts off with 2 songs that flow into one another, Hell and Lore, and I'm gonna play these, so fasten your seatbelts. It's gonna be 7 minutes of metal. Kann ich ein bisschen mehr Bass auf dem Monitor haben, bitte? Thank you. Yeah, so because I think it's always the best to end with music, we can do the Q&A now, and then I'll play 2 more songs in the end. So yeah, just ask me anything. Like I've said it before the workshop, when I posted it on Instagram, even if you're not a bass player or you just have questions about the general musician's life or whatever, just shout it at me. Und ihr könnt es auch auf Deutsch sagen und dann sage ich es nochmal auf Englisch, falls es leichter macht. So how did we come in contact with Polyphia? Just how you said, I think the first chat was between Manuel and Tim, and then I first met them on tour. I think I had some chats with Clay before as well, because I was like covering their stuff and he was checking it out and stuff. So yeah, it was all via Instagram basically. So having a routine is a pretty big challenge actually, in our position, because these days we tour like 4 to 5 months a year. So whenever I'm home, I really have the urge of doing something completely different, which is why I produce for hip-hop artists and stuff like that. So when I'm at home, my routine is like I have a studio. I live in Berlin. The studio is like 40 minutes away, so I go there and make music all day and try to hang out with my girlfriend just as much as I can, because you can't do that when you're on tour, and that sucks. And on tour itself, honestly, there's always this big myth about like, oh, we're taking a interface and a MacBook and we'll definitely be writing songs on tour. Never happened. I've never seen that. Like if you have like a big ass nightliner where you have like space for an actual like little studio room, and I think Bring Me the Horizon are dragging one of their producers through the whole world just so they can produce with him. I mean, we produce everything ourselves, so we could technically do that, but even if I have a whole day off on tour, I would rather just chill, honestly, because it really takes a toll if you don't do that. So tough question. I hope that I will have some sort of actual routine in the next couple of years where I can tell you, yeah, I go to the gym at 7 a.m. and then I go to the studio and then I make a lot of salad or something like that. Unfortunately, not the case right now. Okay, next question. Don't be shy. So what plugins do I use? Was that the question? So one thing I would really recommend, like software-based, is Parallax by Neural DSP. If you just want to jam at home and have a great bass sound straight away, especially for the metal stuff, that's pretty sick. It's all you have to have. And that's how we dial in our bass tone on the album these days as well. Honestly, when I practice, I raw dog it big time. Like sometimes I'm at my parents' place before we tour, because our hometown is always where we start the tour, and I have my setup from when I was 11 years old at my parents' place. So it's literally a Marshall combo like this big, and like the lettering is worn off and everything, and I straight up just plug my bass into that thing and have my laptop with the tracks, and it's the same like here, but just without all the fancy stuff. I would recommend the shittiest setup you can find, because if you sound good on that, you're really doing a good job. Yeah, but for producing, Parallax 100%. It's like a one-in-all solution. Yep. So what strings I play the Dario strings, big shoutouts to the Dario, and it's just a basic 45 to 130 set, so it's like the most basic, and EXL, I just get the long strings so I can also put them on the multi-scale basses. And my favorite tuning, I mean the tuning we play the most is E standard, and the tuning, for example, for the songs I just played was E flat standard, so everything a half step down. I have some songs where I play like drop tuning, so I drop my E string down to a D, which has the advantage of having 2 E strings then, or 2 D strings, however you want to put it. And the guitars, when they play 8 strings, they have, I think, 3 E strings. which is fucking unfair, because if they do licks and they mirror what they play just on these 3 strings, and I don't have them, so I really have to make weird stuff to make these licks happening. But yeah, on the bass I don't experiment as much, but on the guitar I really love like open E major 7 tuning or stuff like that. So if you play guitar, I would always play around with open tunings. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so the strings are very, very low on this one. And I love it that way because obviously it makes it easier to play the fast stuff. And I also play a lot of stuff just with my left hand. So if the action is super high, I have to make a lot of pressure with my left hand to make the notes happening. So, yeah. Some people say maybe that it's kind of a poser thing to do, but I love the low action. I would recommend it. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not a tone guy, but I strive for a good sound, so I would do what's needed. And we also figure out a lot of stuff in the rehearsal space. Like this live tone is like, I would say we all 4 take credit in it because we just sit around that quad cortex and we're like, oh, how can we make it work? And actually Leon, our drummer, is the one who's pushing the buttons on the QC shamefully. But I have a certain vision for it, and that's to make a bass sound sticky, like it's cutting through the mix and you can really hear it, and it's not just like laying the fundamental. So we also work a lot with our front of house engineer then to make that work. And I mean, I am a music producer, but somehow this part of music production that you call tone isn't just my favorite area to work in a way. I'm just not super nerdy about it, but I love when things sound good. And as I said, the bass is already half of the rent. So if you have a bass that sounds great, honestly, we have so much, like even in this tone, there is like almost 50% DI signal. So we split it, so there's a lot of DI signal also on the record. Yeah, that's important. And the second question was, how do I come up with songs or stuff? So yeah, so 3 of my go-to techniques when I write. So I'm gonna start with the stuff when I do like my solo songs, like the song that I just played in the beginning. I can just show a little bit of the backing track, and I mentioned it before. I wrote like a piano piece and then came up with the bass part. And I'll tell you why in a second. So this is just everything but the bass. So yeah, it's basically like a classical piece. It was inspired also by the film Call Me By Your Name, where there's a lot of beautiful piano in there. I tried to match it. I didn't get it, but that was like the starting point. And honestly, I personally don't think that bass is the best instrument to write songs on. You can do it, and if you want to do it, there's one thing that I would advise and that I also used in this song then. If you have like just major or minor or dominant chords, cool thing to do is to put the third up 1 octave. So instead of playing like the traditional voicing with root, third and fifth, I love to just put the third up here and then have the octave or the fifth in between. And then you know the thing with the tapping harmonics, where you just tap the string lightly 1 octave above the chord. And then do a little progression. And then you have like a basic thing that you can move around and put some little licks in between. And that's where producing comes in, because like I or we rarely have a whole riff mapped out just on the instrument and then recorded. It's almost always like a template for what we want to do, and then the licks are like put in between like fills, and I really then focus on like just one bar or half of a bar or maybe just one fucking 16th note, or just to get it out of my head or just to make it sound right to myself. And I try around also with different like pitching techniques and reversing stuff in the DAW, or changing the key or whatever. And if you use Ableton, for example, there's a lot of cool stuff to achieve with that kind of like audio editing. So that's where I'm really nerdy, like what can you do with an audio signal just by like altering it, and what does it do to it. So instead of having a lot of MIDI stuff going on, I love to freeze everything, if you know what freezing is, and then work with the actual audio. And that's also a big part of the unprocessed sound. Like our guitars are so often like pitched down a little bit and then the formant is shifted. So yeah, these were maybe 3 techniques in one big idea. I hope that helps. Yeah. So you asked me who were my biggest influences in the last 24 years. And to drop a few names. So I think my first favorite band when I was a kid was Green Day. That was the first concert I went to, and I think still to this day, like for example my stage presence, if you ever seen us live, like I jump around and stuff like that, I really learned that from Billy Joe Armstrong, and he just has such a great presence on stage, and even though they don't have like complex songs or whatever, I think their musicianship is awesome. And then when I got into metal, I think like the new metal stuff was really important for me, like Slipknot, Korn, that sort of stuff. When I then discovered progressive metal, of course, like Tesseract, Animals as Leaders, I really love to listen to that. And also a lot of stuff outside of metal, like Snarky Puppy, Jacob Collier, Becca Stevens, like this whole ground up niche. I really love that. Yeah, even the Nordic stuff like Calandra, and I also listen to a lot of classical music and soundtracks, and it's hard to name just a few names because I try to keep myself inspired by a lot of people, also just like producers from German rap and all that stuff. But yeah, for the band sound though, I would say main big influences were Tesseract, Animals as Leaders, and even Metallica in a way, because they were the first ones that did like the heavy downstrokes, and yeah, we still do that today. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah. We do that, like manual mixes and masters the songs actually. So we basically do the whole production just by ourselves, which is something I could really recommend, because then you don't have high production costs. This is the first single that we released from that upcoming album. Thank you so much. So yeah, that's a little teaser for what's to come from Unprocessed. And yeah, once again, thank you so much for being here with me tonight. It was an absolute pleasure to do this with you guys. I'm gonna play one more song for my solo project. And yeah, then I'm gonna be here and hang out with you guys.